We're holding a summit over the next 3 days that's looking into emerging markets and the sort of trends that we're seeing across developments in that space, as well as the NFC-related developed market deployments, and just understanding how that ecosystem is developing and how the partnerships are coming together to offer consumers new products. Yeah, the developing world's going very strongly, actually. There's over 100 live deployments now across the emerging markets, and we've seen an increase over the last couple of years in those sort of deployments. I think what we're now seeing is that a very similar process that the emerging markets went through is happening again in the developed markets. So, for example, the very first thing that most operators did was try and understand whether or not they could do this sort of service and offer these experiences to their customers without partnerships. And that didn't really work very well, and very, very quickly operators realized that they needed to find the right partners. And they did that with the emerging markets. Specifically, we have a lot of banks offering these services, micro-insurance companies, a variety of other new services that are coming on board. And in the NFC space, we're starting to see that as well. So in the developed markets, you're starting to see payment processors such as Visa and MasterCard actively get involved with the mobile operators. In addition, you see the banks and the operators talking much more effectively. It's interesting, a lot of people use the word battle, and I think externally, if you're looking at it, there is a bit of animosity externally when people consider the competitive positions of these companies. But when you actually talk to the companies, they're very aware of the value that each of the companies brings. So, as I mentioned before, a bank can't really go out and launch an NFC service effectively without engaging with the operator, because the operator controls the security, they control the user experience to a certain degree, and they can really bring a lot of value to the NFC experience. Well, that's interesting. Again, emerging markets and developed markets are slightly different. In the emerging markets, airtime gifting was something that was one of the first services that were offered. And I think what we're starting to see now is probably more sophisticated products coming online. For example, products that we traditionally wouldn't think of that are of value in the emerging markets, such as micro-insurance, as I mentioned before. In many places, it's customary to ensure that your family gets a proper burial, for example, or if they're unfortunate enough to suffer a death in the family, and that can be a very expensive proposition. So services tailored specifically to meet those consumer needs, they're the sort of things we're we're seeing in the emerging markets. It isn't necessarily that expensive for a small merchant to deploy. There's a number of different ways that can be brought about. Sometimes they're subsidized by the Visa, the MasterCards, the mobile operators, or the banks. But probably more importantly, I think there's a lot of value that these sort of systems bring to a small merchant. Merchants that value sort of fast throughput will get a lot more sales in a faster time using an NFC terminal. But additionally, I think something that's overlooked a lot is the cost of cash. It's not a cheap thing for people to use. It's often overlooked how much time it takes for someone to go out and actually bank that cash and look after that cash, make sure they have enough change, all those sorts of things. And that's where a lot of the payment processors, for example, are trying to educate the merchants about the value of NFC payments. It's actually a little bit more secure than carrying around a credit card, because you almost have the two-part authentication. You have a PIN that you have to put in, just like a credit card. You have to have possession of the phone, but also you get the additional security of a mobile phone in terms of whether or not you choose to lock it and put a passcode to enter it. And I guess the other point is, I think there have been some interesting research over the last couple of years which points out that people on average take about 12 hours to report a lost card, whereas the time to report a lost mobile phone is significantly less, in the range of about 20 minutes. So it's very much harder to misplace your phone than it is to misplace your card.